To heal the paternal wound. Chapter 1. This first chapter immerses us in the foundational aspect of this book. We are going to delve into what that paternal wound truly means and how it impacts our adult lives. When we talk about the paternal wound, we are referring to the sensation of having been deprived of something significant during our childhood. It's not just about the absence of a physically present father, but also emotional deficiencies such as lack of love, attention, support, or protection. It's as if there's an emptiness in our heart, a wound that accompanies us throughout our life. But, how does this wound originate? Well, it's a combination of ingrained beliefs and mishandled circumstances in our past. Historically, there was a cultural notion that the man should be the economic provider while the woman took care of the home and children. However, this rigid dynamic led to conflicts and imbalances in family relationships. The problem lies in that both men and women forgot that these roles didn't completely define who they were. By believing that role to be their identity, significant conflicts arise and give rise to resentments and bitterness in the heart. Children don't understand this. They learn through mirror neurons to imitate and establish what is right and wrong based on what they see at home, and as they grow, on what they compare with other households and families. Children don't discern, they establish beliefs and foundations to support their own growth. A child doesn't discern. A child establishes beliefs and foundations to solidify their own growth. So, when a father doesn't fully fulfill his provider role, the mother can feel unprotected and generate sadness. This leads to an uneven burden of responsibilities, and that leaves a mark on all members of the family. Now, here's the issue: children, in their process of growth and development, cannot discern all the complexities of these family dynamics. What they absorb is what they see and experience at home. If they witness violence, lack of protection, or see sadness in their mother, it leaves a profound mark on them. They might try to compensate for the absence of the father by assuming roles that aren't theirs, attempting to protect and make their mother happy. However, this only creates confusion in their identity and hinders their ability to become parents in the future. This first chapter invites us to reflect on how these wounds take root within us and how they impact our adult lives. It encourages us to examine our own roles and ingrained beliefs, and to free ourselves from those unconscious loyalties that hinder our progress. As we continue to explore the following chapters, we will discover strategies and tools to heal these wounds and find a more authentic way of living. Get ready for a journey of self-exploration and discovery, where we will learn to heal the wounds of the past and build healthier, more balanced relationships. The path may be challenging, but it's also rewarding. Together, we will take the necessary steps to free ourselves from the weight of that paternal wound and construct a healthier and more stable life. How the wound arises. The wound arises from a matter of beliefs and culture. The man is the one who provides protection, used to provide for the family's upkeep, and was the sole breadwinner. The woman stayed at home and depended on the man's support. This generated a pattern of beliefs in which wounds and resentments developed when this pattern wasn't fulfilled correctly. Culturally, the man was obligated to play the role of economic and food provider. And when the man didn't fulfill the entirety of his role, the woman felt weak and unhappy. There was an imbalance of roles, but the problem with the formation of wounds is that both the man and the woman forgot that these were established roles and not so much their identity. When a child grows up in an environment where they witness violence, the lack of protection from the father, or the constant sadness of their mother, it's highly likely that they will develop a paternal wound. In an attempt to protect their mother and seek her happiness, they may assume a role that isn't theirs, taking on responsibilities that are too large for their young age. The problem arises when these roles that don't belong to them become ingrained in their identity and persist into adulthood. Upon becoming a father, they may struggle to fully commit to their new role, as their identity role has been occupied for a long time. This can lead to difficulties in establishing a deep connection with their own children and trigger dysfunctional behavior patterns that repeat from generation to generation. To progress as individuals, it's necessary to analyze and recognize that old role that has been present in our lives and learn to let it go. It's a process of identifying the unconscious loyalties toward an absent parent and freeing ourselves from those ties. Only then can we unconsciously reaffirm our new role as parents and move forward freely in our lives. Later on, in this same chapter, we will see different wounds. This work of self-discovery and liberation allows us to heal the paternal wound. Being aware of these dynamics will give us the opportunity to break free from patterns of the past and create healthier and more balanced family relationships. Advancing as individuals involves confronting and overcoming the unconscious loyalties that limit us. Before we continue examining these wounds, I would like to emphasize something. It's interesting to observe how the paternal wound can vary depending on the culture and beliefs that underlie it. In cultures like the Minangkabau in Indonesia, where a matrilineal system prevails, family and gender dynamics are very different from what we've mentioned before. In these societies, descent and inheritance are transmitted through the female line, implying that women have a predominant role in political and economic decision-making, as well as in managing household economy and production of goods. In this context, the paternal wound can manifest differently. The roles and responsibilities of men and women are distributed differently, and men may have a role more focused on politics, religion, and education. Therefore, the absence or lack of paternal involvement can have distinct implications in the lives of individuals in these cultures. This leads us to reflect on how our beliefs and cultural systems influence the way we experience and process the paternal wound. Each country, education, and religion has its own dynamics and social norms that determine how family relationships are established and the impact they have on individuals. In the end, what determines the existence of a paternal wound, as well as a maternal wound, is closely related to the brain's primitive survival system and how it processes experiences of danger or lack. These experiences are framed within the beliefs and values that are transmitted and accepted in each specific culture. Therefore, it's important to recognize and understand how our cultural beliefs shape our personal experiences and the wounds we carry. By broadening our perspective and considering different cultural contexts, we can appreciate the diversity of human experiences and how each society addresses family relationships and child rearing. How to tell if you have a paternal wound. Often, our relationship with our father is influenced by how our mother perceives him. When we are children, we see the world through our mother's eyes, and if she doesn't respect our father, it will affect the dynamic between both parents. If the mother sees the father as weak, violent, absent, or not hardworking, it's very likely that the child will adopt roles to compensate for that absence. We might find ourselves acting as our mother's husband, trying to take a place that doesn't belong to us. We can also become the protector of mom, always ready to defend her from any perceived threat. We might even become mom's accomplice, supporting her discontent with the father. In all these roles, a barrier or resentment towards the father is created, making it difficult for a healthy and balanced relationship to develop. Healing the paternal wound is a journey that requires dedication and personal work, but it's entirely possible. The first step is recognizing and accepting that this wound exists within us. You can start by observing your own thoughts and opinions about your father. If you have a relationship with your father based on respect, it's a good indication that you're not experiencing emotional blockages or resentment towards him. However, it's important to recognize that even in respectful relationships, you might have internalized certain beliefs and behavior patterns influenced by his way of being. Our parents are significant figures in our lives, and their behavior has an impact on our upbringing and development. Even with respect, it's natural that we've absorbed certain beliefs or ways of acting that have been modeled by our father. For example, if your father is a hardworking and successful person, you likely internalized the importance of effort and dedication in your own life. However, it's also possible that you've taken on excessive pressure to succeed or have difficulties relaxing and enjoying moments of rest. Similarly, if your father tends to be critical or perfectionistic, you may have internalized an inner demanding voice or feel the need to constantly seek approval from others. It's important to become aware of these beliefs and patterns that we have internalized to evaluate whether they are beneficial or limiting in our lives. If you discover that certain beliefs are restricting you or causing emotional discomfort, it's crucial to question and challenge them. On the other hand, if you experience tension in your body or notice that you have an attitude of superiority or contempt towards your father, it's likely that a paternal wound exists that needs to be addressed and healed. These feelings can be indicators of a dysfunctional relationship or accumulated pain in your bond with your father. Tension in the body is a physical sign that something is not in emotional balance. It can manifest as stiffness, discomfort, or even physical pains. These symptoms can be a signal that there are unresolved emotions in a relationship that are affecting your overall well-being. In the following chapters, we will explain in greater detail the different types of paternal wounds and how they affect sons and daughters, as well as how they block the flow of vitality within them. However, at this moment, let's take a brief look at these wounds to be able to recognize them. Most common types of wounds and their impact on adult life. Let's take a look at the most common wounds. Later on, we will examine real cases of individuals and stories, exploring how the same wound affects sons and how it affects daughters. Let's begin. Abandonment wound. The abandonment wound is a deep and painful wound that a child can experience. This wound occurs when the father leaves either physically or emotionally, leaving the child with feelings of rejection, abandonment, and a sense of betrayal. It can manifest through parental divorce, when the father leaves the family, or fails to fulfill the responsibilities of the marital agreement. This wound has a significant impact on the child's life, leading to low self-esteem and a feeling of not being enough. The child experiences abandonment and rejection, leading to insecurity and difficulties in forming healthy relationships. In adulthood, these challenges manifest as a sense of disconnection and an inability to fully trust in relationships. Fear of betrayal and rejection become emotional barriers that hinder opening up the heart and forming lasting bonds. It's important to note that these wounds can heal. An example of how the abandonment wound can manifest in adulthood is the case of Leonard. He always felt that he couldn't achieve his goals, no matter how hard he tried. This was due to the abandonment wound he carried from his father's absence. His self-esteem was affected, and he constantly sought something more to prove his worth. Despite being admired by his peers, he didn't feel sufficient. The feeling of mistrust and fear of being betrayed or rejected accompanied him constantly. Leonard recalls a particular episode that reflects how the abandonment wound affected his behavior. After winning a race medal, instead of enjoying the achievement, he felt anxiety and adopted a cold and arrogant attitude towards his peers. He remembers the words that repeated in his mind. They went like this: "I can't lose. I won't allow myself to lose." Behind these words was the fear of experiencing loss. To feel this loss meant he would feel the pain of his father's absence, in other words, the abandonment. At 46 years old, Leonard wanted to heal this because it was causing him immense suffering, and his marital relationships didn't last more than 2 years. Eventually, he decided to seek therapeutic help from Peter. Initially, he was seeking to resolve his relationship conflicts, but as they delved deeper, the paternal wound he had been avoiding confronting emerged. Criticism wound. The criticism wound is another wound that can leave a deep mark on a child's life. It occurs when the father is consistently critical and disapproving, leading to low self-esteem and a constant feeling of inadequacy. Continuous criticism can create a negative self-image in the child, which has lasting effects on their mental and emotional well-being. In adulthood, this wound can manifest as self-esteem and self-confidence issues, difficulties in making decisions, and struggles to establish healthy boundaries in personal relationships. The child, and later the adult, experiences an unfulfilled need for approval. In this case, even if they perform tasks adequately and receive recognition for their work, internally they always feel undervalued. This leads them to be excessively demanding of themselves. The critical voice of the father becomes an internal voice that accompanies them throughout their life journey. Let's take the example of Jonas, who experienced the criticism wound. Jonas was very self-critical and had low self-esteem. His romantic relationship was unstable, and his partner was quite controlling, leading to frequent arguments because Jonas couldn't handle criticism. He also struggled with organization and was forgetful. When his partner pointed out his mistakes due to his forgetfulness, he would get angry and end up in episodes where he cried out of fear of not being loved. In Jonas's unconscious mind, the associated belief was that criticism meant they didn't love him. This belief became ingrained in him due to the lack of love and recognition from his father, who constantly criticized him in a negative way. This caused him to sink into a pit of loneliness and despair when someone criticized him. He had to embark on a healing process to overcome this wound and address the desperation he felt as a child when he wasn't seen or valued by his father. This healing process involved the use of visualization techniques, where his unconscious mind imagined all the emotional needs that weren't fulfilled and expressed them to his father. Then, he worked on releasing that wound through forgiveness. Currently, Jonas has developed a greater tolerance for criticism and no longer gets caught in emotional dramas that used to trigger deep suffering. This example illustrates how the wound of criticism can have a significant impact on a person's life. However, it also shows that it is possible to heal and free oneself from this wound through conscious work and emotional healing. By addressing and resolving the unmet emotional needs and forgiving those who hurt us, we can free ourselves from the pattern of self-criticism and develop greater self-confidence. Abuse wound. The abuse wound is one of the most severe and devastating wounds a child can experience. It occurs when the parent abuses the child physically or emotionally, which has profound repercussions in adulthood. The aftermath of this wound can manifest as self-esteem issues, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders. Physical abuse leaves a deep mark on the brain and the functioning of several important areas such as the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. These areas are involved in key processes such as learning, memory, emotional regulation, and decision-making. Physical abuse can lead to alterations in these areas, such as an increase in the size of the amygdala, which is related to heightened stress sensitivity and difficulties in regulating emotions. Additionally, it can impact the prefrontal cortex, affecting the ability to make decisions and control behavior. In adulthood, those who have experienced physical abuse may encounter difficulties in retaining information in memory. They may forget simple tasks or have trouble recalling specific events. The brain processes memory differently compared to those who haven't experienced physical abuse. An example of the effects of the abuse wound is the case of Enrique. Due to the severe physical abuse he endured from his father, Enrique developed difficulties in memory and self-confidence. His wife had to leave notes all around the house to remind him of certain tasks as he tended to forget them. Additionally, Enrique had memories of his mother yelling at his father, and he was very sensitive. In many cases, children become the target of parental anger when there are conflicts within the couple. The father channeled his anger towards his children. This happens in many cases. Children become an extension of the couple's love. When the couple argues a lot, one way to hurt the spouse is through the children. The unconscious mind perceives attacking the children as equivalent to attacking the wife. This dynamic is harmful and can leave lasting emotional scars. It's important to note that in the past, child abuse was more common and socially accepted in many cultures. Physical punishment was considered an acceptable form of discipline on many occasions. Additionally, the lack of resources and support services for families also increased children's vulnerability to abuse. Nowadays, efforts are being made to reduce cases of abuse and to re-educate society about the importance of love and respect in child rearing. It has been shown that fear is not an effective teaching method for children. Rather, they learn through imitation and example. Absence wound. The absence wound is a painful experience that occurs when the father is physically present but emotionally unavailable for the child. This can generate feelings of disconnection and abandonment in the child. In adulthood, this wound can manifest as difficulties in forming intimate relationships and trusting others. There are various reasons why this lack of presence from the father can occur. It could be that the father doesn't pay attention to the emotional needs of the child, isn't interested in their talents, and lacks the desire to help nurture them. It could also be due to personal issues the father is facing, such as alcohol abuse, that prevent him from being emotionally present. He might have an alcohol addiction as a way to escape emotions or because he doesn't know how to manage his problems or face them. Another cause can be a family dynamic in which the mother is dominant and controlling, limiting the father's will and capacity to be present in the child's life. This wound is very common in our society due to long-prevailing gender stereotypes and roles. Men have been taught not to connect with their emotions and to suppress them. Social stereotypes have created a block in the male brain's ability to experience and express a wide range of emotions. Men were pressured to fulfill their duty, and women theirs, leaving no room to understand beyond these established patterns. It's important to recognize that the father's emotional absence can have a significant impact on the child's life. This wound can create a sense of emotional emptiness and difficulties in forming emotional connections with others. Overcoming this wound involves working on developing the ability to connect with one's own emotions and establishing healthy relationships based on trust and intimacy. Emotional support deficit wound. The emotional support deficit wound occurs when the father fails to provide adequate emotional support, which can lead to difficulties in managing and regulating emotions. In adulthood, this wound can manifest as anxiety, depression, and challenges in establishing intimate relationships and expressing emotions. This wound can arise from seemingly simple yet impactful situations. For instance, when a child seeks help or advice from their father and he redirects them, saying, "Talk to your mother about these things." Or when the child goes to the father in tears over something that has happened, and the father chastises them, saying, "Be a man, men don't cry." These insensitive and emotionally unsupportive responses convey harmful messages to the child. They teach them that their emotions are not valid or acceptable and that they should suppress them. This can have a significant impact on emotional development and the ability to express and manage emotions in a healthy way in adulthood. The lack of emotional support from the father can lead to feelings of loneliness and abandonment in the child. It can make them feel incapable of sharing their feelings and experiences with others, making it difficult to form intimate emotional connections. Additionally, it can lead to issues of anxiety and depression, as the child hasn't learned to properly manage their emotions and lacks the necessary support to navigate the emotional challenges of life. Unconscious choices stemming from the wounds. Impulsive decisions are responses that are made unconsciously, without prior analysis or planning. These decisions are often judged by others as hasty or incorrect, as they are made without considering possible long-term consequences. When making impulsive decisions, it's important to reflect on the sensations they evoke within us. Do they bring us peace and tranquility, or do they create a sense of restlessness and a rush of adrenaline? These sensations can vary from person to person, and can also depend on the context and specific situation. In some cases, impulsive decisions can generate a feeling of excitement and enthusiasm, as they provide a burst of energy and allow us to act spontaneously. They can offer an escape from monotony or routine, and give us the sense of living intensely in the present moment. However, these impulsive decisions can also be driven by fear or emotional impulsivity. Instead of being the result of a rational evaluation of available options, they can be influenced by the need to avoid fear or seek immediate gratification. In these cases, impulsive decisions can lead to unwanted or even dangerous consequences. It's important to note that not all impulsive decisions are necessarily negative. In some cases, they can open up new opportunities and experiences in life. However, it's crucial to find a balance between spontaneity and considering potential long-term consequences. When we carry emotional wounds, they have a significant impact on how we perceive and respond to different situations. These wounds act as lenses through which we interpret reality. Instead of seeing a situation neutrally, our wounds drive us to constantly perceive potential threats and dangers around us. When a wound is triggered, our threat response system is activated. Our brain, in its function of protection and survival, doesn't distinguish whether the threat is real or imaginary. To the brain, what matters is reacting and responding quickly to ensure our survival. This automatic and unconscious response can lead us to make impulsive decisions without considering the long-term consequences. The primary focus is to respond immediately and protect ourselves from what we perceive as a threat. At that moment, the sense of danger can trigger a release of adrenaline and a heightened sense of energy, which can result in impulsive decision-making. It's important to consider that these impulsive decisions can be an unconscious strategy to avoid the pain associated with our wounds. By acting impulsively, we avoid delving into the emotions and underlying wounds that might be present. However, this way of acting can perpetuate the cycle of pain and keep us trapped in unhealthy patterns. To address these impulsive decisions, it's necessary to become aware of the emotional wounds at play and recognize how they affect our perceptions and responses. By working on the healing of these wounds, we can gain greater emotional clarity and balance, enabling us to make more conscious decisions aligned with our long-term goals and values. The healing process involves exploring our wounds, understanding their origins, and learning to respond consciously rather than react automatically. This provides us with the opportunity to make decisions based on a clearer and more balanced perspective. Rave. Let's see two examples. Claudia and Christopher. Claudia is a woman who struggles with the compulsion to eat whenever she feels lonely. It might seem like a senseless habit, but in reality, this unconscious behavior is rooted in a deep emotional wound. When we delve deeper into her history, we discover that the root of this wound comes from her mother. When Claudia was a child, Her mother experienced a sense of abandonment from her husband. But here's the detail: this trauma isn't just her mother's, it goes back through previous generations. Claudia's grandmother also experienced the absence of her father, and this wound has been passed down through the generations. For Claudia's family, feeling lonely was equivalent to going hungry. In their family line, the role of the man was to provide food, and when that father or father figure was absent, it was associated with lack of nourishment and security. So, compulsive eating became a defense mechanism to confront that feeling of loneliness and fear of scarcity. The obesity of Claudia's mother is also related to this wound of father's absence. Her choices to overeat were driven by that unconscious need to fill the emotional void and the sense of lacking nourishment they experienced. It's important to understand that these decisions are not conscious or rational. They are automatic and unconscious responses to a deep wound that has been ingrained in the family history. Claudia, by realizing the connection between her compulsion to eat and this ancestral wound, has taken the first step towards healing. In therapy, Claudia has explored and better understood the underlying emotions driving her compulsive eating. She has worked on healing her relationship with food, recognizing that her need to overeat is not truly about physical hunger, but about unsatisfied emotional hunger. As Claudia has become more aware of this wound and understood how it has affected her decisions, she has started to make more conscious and loving choices for herself. Gradually, she is freeing herself from the pattern of compulsive eating and seeking healthier ways to fulfill her emotional needs. Christopher, a man who has left his brides at the altar on 3 occasions. It might seem like an impulsive and puzzling decision, but in reality, it is rooted in a deep and unresolved wound. This wound was formed during his childhood, stemming from the conflicts he witnessed between his parents. Even though his parents got married and had Christopher, they were so absorbed in their work that they gave him very little attention and emotional care. This left a mark on Christopher, who unconsciously developed a fear of getting married and having children. The fear was rooted in the subconscious belief that if he had children, he might repeat the same pattern of abandonment he had experienced in his own childhood. He felt a strong sense of guilt and fear of becoming what he had rejected in his parents, which generated deep anxiety and panic when he approached the altar. For Christopher, his unconscious decision to leave his brides at the altar was a form of protection. His subconscious mind interpreted marriage as a threat, associated with his wound of abandonment and fear of becoming an absent father. This automatic response was his way of avoiding facing the pain and the possibility of repeating the family pattern he so greatly feared. What Christopher did afterward is crucial. He immersed himself in a process of personal healing. Through therapy, he was able to delve into and gain a deeper understanding of this underlying wound that was sabotaging his relationships. By working on his relationship with abandonment and the fear of becoming an absent father, he was able to free himself from the emotional bonds that had kept him trapped in this repetitive cycle. These 2 examples remind us that there is always a story behind our behaviors and decisions. By understanding and addressing those underlying wounds, we can start the process of healing and live a more fulfilling and authentic life. Where does all this happen in the brain? Regarding the influence of emotional wounds on the brain, a significant amount of research has been conducted in the field of neuroscience. A relevant discovery is the connection between the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The amygdala plays a crucial role in processing and regulating emotions in the brain. It is an almond-shaped structure located in the limbic system, and it has been found to be linked to emotional responses, particularly in intense situations such as fear, anger, and anxiety. In individuals who have experienced emotional wounds or traumas, it has been observed that the amygdala can be hyperactive. This means that it responds in an exaggerated manner to emotional signals, which can result in increased sensitivity and emotional reactivity. The hyperactivity of the amygdala in people with emotional wounds may explain why they react intensely to situations that remind them of the trauma or trigger negative emotions associated with the wound. Even small emotional stimuli can trigger an exaggerated emotional response, leading to impulsive and disproportionate reactions. Antonio Damasio, a renowned neurologist and neuroscientist known for his research on emotion processing and decision-making in the brain, has spoken about the amygdala in the following way. The amygdala is like the brain's smoke detector, alerting us to potential emotional threats and triggering our survival responses. The hyperactivity of the amygdala can be related to difficulties in regulating emotions. It can also impact communication and interaction with other brain areas responsible for emotional regulation, such as the prefrontal cortex. This can make it challenging to manage emotions healthily and make balanced decisions. It's important to note that the hyperactivity of the amygdala is not permanent or unchangeable. Through therapy and practices of emotional self-regulation, it's possible to reduce this hyperactivity and strengthen connections with other brain regions responsible for emotional regulation, facilitating greater emotional balance and more conscious decision-making. On the other hand, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, located in the frontal part of the brain, plays a crucial role in decision-making and emotional regulation. However, it has been observed that in individuals with emotional wounds, there is lower activation in this brain area. This connection between the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is relevant for understanding how emotional wounds can influence impulsive decisions. The hyperactive amygdala can send intense and rapid emotional signals to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which can lead to impulsive decisions based on emotional responses without considering the long-term consequences. These findings support the idea that emotional wounds can impact how we process emotions and make decisions. By understanding the brain mechanisms involved, we can work on healing these wounds and develop strategies for making more conscious and balanced decisions. It's often been said, "This person is just like that, end of story. They're bad because they have malice." The reality is not that simple from a scientific, neurological, and psychological standpoint. There is still much work to be done in this field, but gradually, more insights are being gained into the human psyche and how the brain responds.